Paris, the Parc de France, Wednesday night, one of the most electric stadiums in European football, packed with noise, expectation and pressure. Chelsea Football Club walking into that environment, not as visitors trying to survive, but as a side that has already beaten this exact opponent on the biggest stage just months ago. That is where we are right now. The reality for both clubs is that this is not a tie built on mystery. Chelsea and Paris Saint-Germain know each other. They have studied each other. They have faced each other across 9 previous meetings, and they are perfectly level on 3 wins apiece with 3 draws separating those results. Nobody has an edge on paper. Nobody can claim dominance. And that makes Wednesday night even more fascinating because the first leg of this tie has the potential to shift that balance permanently. But before we get into the detail of how this tie is likely to unfold, we need to understand the conditions both teams arrive in, because this is not a straightforward story of 2 equally prepared sides meeting on neutral ground. The picture is far more complicated than that. And those complications, when you examine them closely, reveal exactly why this tie could be decided by factors that have nothing to do with individual quality or tactical blueprints. It is now clear that Paris Saint-Germain are coming into this fixture in a state of genuine crisis, not a manufactured crisis, not the kind of media exaggeration that follows every big club when they lose a game. A real, structural, deeply concerning crisis that touches defence, midfield, physical conditioning and confidence. And on the other side, Chelsea arrive having played 120 minutes of cup football just days before, leaning heavily on key players Liam Rosenior would have preferred to protect. Both teams are compromised, but the nature of their problems is entirely different, and that difference will define what happens at the Parc des Princes on Wednesday night. Let us break it all down. 10 goals, that is the number that defines Paris Saint-Germain's recent defensive record across matches against Monaco and Rennes. 10 goals conceded. For a club of their resources, their stature and their Champions League ambitions, that number is not just alarming. It is a flashing warning signal that something has gone fundamentally wrong at the back. The 3-1 defeat to Monaco at home is the moment that crystallised everything. Paris Saint-Germain, playing in front of their own supporters, were beaten convincingly by a domestic rival. And the manner of the defeat pointed to problems that go far deeper than a single bad result. The evidence suggests this is not about individual errors or a goalkeeper having a bad night. It is a systemic issue rooted in the collapse of the defensive unit as a whole. Willian Pacho has faced serious questions about his recent form. Marquinhos, the experienced captain and one of the most decorated defenders in the club's history, has also come under scrutiny. When your 2 most reliable central defensive figures are both struggling for form in the same window of time, right before a knockout Champions League tie, the consequences become obvious. Now add to that a midfield that is physically depleted and understaffed, and you begin to understand why the pressure on Paris Saint-Germain is so severe heading into Wednesday. Before we get deeper into the full analysis, if you want this level of detail on every Chelsea story, every big European night, every tactical breakdown that matters for this club, hit that subscribe button right now. Maya on Chelsea exists to give you the full picture, not the headlines, not the noise, but the actual analysis. Hit subscribe and you will never miss a video. The midfield problem at Paris Saint-Germain, the heart of Paris Saint-Germain's issues right now, is not in the final third. It is not about goals or creativity or the quality of their attacking players. It is in the middle of the pitch where Luis Enrique's entire system depends on energy, cover, pressing intensity and the ability to recycle possession under pressure. That midfield is broken right now and the consequences are spreading to every other area of the team. Fabián Ruiz is injured, João Neves is injured. Those 2 names together represent the spine of what Luis Enrique has tried to build through the season. Fabián Ruiz brings technical quality and the ability to progress the ball through tight spaces. João Neves brings something different, something arguably harder to replace. He brings energy, intensity and the kind of relentless defensive work rate that allows the players around him to take risks higher up the pitch. Without Neves, the midfield loses its engine. It loses the player who covers the ground that nobody else wants to cover. And the consequences of his absence are already visible in those 10 goals conceded across recent fixtures. The situation is that Warren Zaïre-Emery, one of the most talented young midfielders in European football, is physically drained. That phrase is important. Not out of form, not struggling technically, physically drained. He is being asked to do too much to cover the spaces that 2 absent teammates would normally fill, and the physical toll of that workload is now showing in his performances. And then there is Vitinha. Now, this is where the story gets particularly interesting for a Chelsea audience, because Vitinha is not just any midfielder. He is one of the most technically gifted players in the Paris Saint-Germain squad, a player whose relationship with the football is exceptional, whose ability to find pockets of space and dictate tempo is a genuine weapon for Luis Enrique's system. But right now, the evidence suggests that Vitinha is unable to cover the same ground he would normally cover. That phrase, unable to cover the same ground, tells you something critical. It tells you that the workload being placed on the midfield is beyond what individuals can absorb. Vitinha is being stretched beyond his natural operating range. And for a player whose game is built around intelligence and positioning rather than relentless physical running, being asked to compensate for two absent teammates is not something his profile allows him to do sustainably. There is also a deeper layer to this. Vitinha is a player who, by his own admission, built his career on being exceptional with the ball at his feet. His development as a complete midfielder required him to add defensive intensity to that technical foundation. That process happened over time under demanding management at Porto. But even with that growth, Vitinha is not a player who naturally dominates the defensive phase through physical dominance. He works hard, but his ceiling in terms of ground covered and defensive aggression is different to what a player like João Neves provides. Remove Neves from the equation and you expose that distinction immediately. Vitinha cannot replace what Neves gives the team. Nobody in the current available squad fully can. And Chelsea's midfield will have the opportunity to exploit that gap if they approach Wednesday night with the right intelligence. The defensive crisis and what it means for Chelsea. 10 goals in recent matches is the headline, but the specific names caught up in the form crisis deserve closer attention. William Pacho is a defender who arrived at Paris Saint-Germain with serious expectations attached to him. He was brought in to provide physical presence and organisational reliability at the back. The reality is that his recent form has come under serious question, and that matters enormously when you consider the kind of pressure Chelsea can put on a defensive line. Jão Pedro has scored 18 goals this season. He netted again in the 4-2 win over Wrexham in the FA Cup. Alan Shearer has publicly praised two specific attributes the Brazilian possesses, and critically, he has already scored against Paris Saint-Germain before. That last detail is not trivial. It means Pacho, Marquinhos and the entire Paris Saint-Germain defensive structure have to approach Wednesday night fully aware that Chelsea's main striker has a goal against them on his record and is currently in the best form of his season. Marquinhos is the other figure under scrutiny. As a defender who has spent years as one of the most dependable figures in League One and in European competition, the current questions about his form represent an unusual moment. Even the most experienced players have periods where their sharpness drops, where the decisions feel slightly slower, where the positioning is slightly off. The evidence suggests Marquinhos is in one of those periods right now, and the timing could not be worse. For Chelsea, this is not just an opportunity, it is an invitation. A creaking defensive structure, a physically compromised midfield that cannot provide the protection those defenders need, and an opponent in serious crisis at home. That combination creates the kind of environment where a well-organised, tactically disciplined Chelsea side can cause real damage. Chelsea's own challenges, the Wrexham factor. Now, let us be honest about Chelsea's situation going into Wednesday, because this analysis is not about painting a flattering picture for one side. It is about understanding the full reality. Liam Rosenior's side played 120 minutes of cup football against Wrexham in the FA Cup. That match, which Chelsea won 4-2, required extra time. Extra time against a physical championship side, the kind of physically demanding opponent whose approach to the game puts enormous strain on the legs, lungs and muscles of every player who steps on the pitch. Rosenior made changes, he rotated where he could, but the situation is that players like Jão Pedro and Marc Cucurella were still required to come on during that match. That is not ideal preparation for a Champions League round of 16 first leg that begins on Wednesday. Rosenior would not have wanted those key figures to spend any minutes on the pitch in a cup tie just days before facing Paris Saint-Germain away from home. The 120 minutes of football matter because of how they compound. It is not just about who is tired, it is about who goes into Wednesday carrying even a fraction more fatigue than they would ideally carry. Muscle groups that are slightly tighter, reactions that are fractionally slower. That level of detail might seem minor until you are defending in the 75th minute at the Parc des Princes against a team desperate to protect a lead. And yet, despite all of that, the Chelsea camp has genuine reasons for confidence. The Club World Cup final result sits as the defining reference point for this tie. A 3-0 victory against Paris Saint-Germain on neutral ground with the full weight of a final attached to it. That result did not happen by accident. It happened because Chelsea were tactically prepared, physically competitive, and able to execute against a team that, even at full strength, could not find a way through. The head-to-head record and what it reveals. 9 previous meetings, 3 wins for Paris Saint-Germain, 3 wins for Chelsea, 3 draws. The numbers could not be more balanced if someone had designed them that way. That symmetry tells an important story. It tells you that neither team has ever been able to establish psychological dominance over the other. Every time Paris Saint-Germain have come out on top, Chelsea have eventually responded. Every time Chelsea have won, Paris Saint-Germain have bounced back. The record reflects 2 clubs that match up closely, 2 sets of players and managers who find ways to adapt, to adjust, and to compete at the highest level, regardless of which direction the momentum is flowing. But within that perfect balance, there is a recent trend worth noting. Paris Saint-Germain won the 2 matches that came before the Club World Cup final, 2 victories back-to-back. And then Chelsea turned up in that final and reversed the pattern entirely with a 3-0 win. That sequence matters because it tells you something important about how quickly the dynamic between these 2 clubs can shift. The first leg on Wednesday is the opportunity for Paris Saint-Germain to reassert themselves on home soil. They know the Club World Cup result gave Chelsea a psychological edge. They know the tie will partly be played in the mind as much as on the grass. And at the Parc de France, with their supporters creating the kind of atmosphere that turns an already difficult assignment into something even more challenging, Paris Saint-Germain will be desperate to set a tone. The question is whether their current state, the injuries, the form crisis, the defensive vulnerability allows them to do that. The Vitinha story and its importance for Chelsea. Let us take a moment to go deeper on Vitinha specifically, because understanding who he is and how he operates is directly relevant to how this midfield battle will play out on Wednesday. The reality for Vitinha as a player is built on a very specific foundation. His development required him to face a demanding environment and make a choice. That environment was Porto, under a manager who gave him no comfort, no reassurance, no protection from the requirement to meet an elite standard every single day. The demands placed on him in that period were primarily about defensive intensity. He was technically exceptional. Everyone around him understood that. But technical quality at the highest level is not enough if you cannot also contribute in the defensive phase, if you cannot add aggression and work rate to the intelligence you already possess. That is the challenge he faced, and by his own admission, he met it. He grew, he became a more complete player. But here is what is relevant for Chelsea right now. Even a more complete Vitinha, a player who has added defensive layers to his game, is still primarily a ball carrier, a technical operator, who functions best when the team around him is structured and protected. Remove the defensive cover that João Neves provides. Remove the energy and intensity that Fabián Ruiz contributes. Leave Vitinha operating in a midfield that is already physically drained and understaffed. And what you get is a player whose strengths cannot fully compensate for the structural weaknesses surrounding him. Chelsea's midfield, if they approach this correctly, can target exactly that. They can press the spaces Vitinha occupies. They can force him into situations where his defensive limitations, the ones that even he acknowledges still required work, become exposed. Without Neves alongside him to cover and protect, Vitinha is carrying more than his natural profile allows. That is not a criticism of the player. It is a structural observation based on the current reality at Paris Saint-Germain. And it is the kind of detail that a well-prepared Chelsea side under a manager studying the opponent will have identified already: the Parc de France factor and first leg reality. Let us not pretend that the Parc de France is a neutral venue. It is not. Paris Saint-Germain at home in a Champions League knockout tie is a different proposition entirely from the Paris Saint-Germain that just lost 3-1 to Monaco in Ligue 1. The atmosphere that stadium generates, the noise, the pressure, the expectation from supporters who have been waiting for this club to deliver on the European stage creates an environment that has historically made life very difficult for visiting sides. Even teams that arrive in good form and full health find the Parc des Princes a hostile place to operate. Chelsea are coming off 120 minutes of cup football. They will be carrying some level of fatigue, regardless of how well Rosenior manages his squad in the days before Wednesday. And they are walking into an environment where Paris Saint-Germain's players will feel the full force of their supporters demanding a response after the Monaco humiliation. The reality for Chelsea is that the first leg away from home is always the moment to be disciplined, organised and difficult to beat. You do not need to win in Paris to win the tie. You need to avoid conceding in a way that makes the second leg at Stamford Bridge unmanageable. A 1-0 or 2-1 defeat is not a disaster if Chelsea can limit the damage and return home with the tie still alive. A 3-0 or 4-0 defeat, the kind of result Paris Saint-Germain supporters are dreaming of, would be an entirely different situation. So the first leg, despite Chelsea's confidence and despite Paris Saint-Germain's well-documented problems, is still a tie where caution and defensive discipline carry enormous value. Liam Rosenior will know that, his players will know it, and the job on Wednesday night is to stay in the tie while creating enough of a foothold to launch a genuine assault in the second leg at Stamford Bridge. João Neves and the return that changes everything. The clearest indicator of how serious Paris Saint-Germain's midfield situation is comes from one specific detail. The return of João Neves is being described as crucial to restoring stability. One player, one midfielder, and his absence has destabilised an entire team to the point where conceding 10 goals in recent matches is the visible result. That is how important Neves is to how Luis Enrique's system functions. The situation is that his return has become the central question for Paris Saint-Germain ahead of Wednesday. Will he be fit? Will he be ready? Will he be available for even part of the match? Because without him, the problems Chelsea have identified in that midfield remain fully exposed. With him, even at something less than full fitness, the dynamic shifts considerably. For Chelsea, that uncertainty is actually a useful piece of information. Because if Neves is fit and starts, Chelsea must be prepared for a significantly different Paris Saint-Germain than the one that stumbled against Monaco. A Neves-led midfield with Vitinha operating in his preferred role, with the defensive cover he needs to express his technical quality, is a far more coherent and threatening unit than what we have seen in recent League One matches. And if Neves is still absent, the opportunity for Chelsea to exploit that midfield gap becomes even more significant. Rosenior's preparation for this tie will have included both scenarios, because that is what serious management requires. You cannot build your game plan around the hope that a key opponent remains injured. You have to be ready for them to recover, to be sharp, to be at their best, and you also have to have a clear plan for exploiting the structure if they are not available. Jão Pedro and the striker who has already done it. Of all the Chelsea factors in this tie, the one that should genuinely concern Luis Enrique and his defensive unit is João Pedro's current form combined with his existing record against this opponent. 18 goals in the season, a strike against Wrexham in the 4-2 FA Cup win to continue a scoring run that has made him one of the most consistent strikers in the division. Alan Shearer highlighting two specific attributes that define his game, and a previous goal against Paris Saint-Germain already on his record. That last detail changes the psychological equation slightly. A striker who has already beaten this goalkeeper, already found a way past this defensive line, already contributed to a result against this specific opponent, carries a different kind of confidence into Wednesday night. He is not going to Paris wondering if he can score against them. He has already done it. The situation is that Paris Saint-Germain's defensive structure, currently under scrutiny and questioned in terms of form, will face the most informed striker Chelsea have had in years. Pacho and Marquinhos have enough experience to know how to prepare mentally for that challenge. But preparation and execution are two different things, especially when your form has been poor and the team around you is physically compromised. If Chelsea can get the ball to Pedro in positions where he can run at a defensive line that is already under pressure from a struggling midfield providing limited protection, the possibility of Chelsea scoring in Paris is genuinely realistic. What Wednesday night actually means, let us bring everything together. Paris Saint-Germain are the home side. They have the Parc de France. They have supporters desperate for a response after the Monaco defeat. They have Luis Enrique, a manager who has demonstrated his tactical intelligence across the biggest stages in European football. They have Vitinha, even in a stretched and compromised midfield, as a technical operator capable of moments that change games. But they have 10 goals conceded in recent fixtures. They have two key midfielders injured. They have defensive figures in uncertain form. They have a physical conditioning problem that has left their available midfielders drained and stretched beyond their natural capacity. And they have a Chelsea side coming in with a 3-0 Club World Cup win already on the record. Chelsea are the away side. They carry fatigue from 120 minutes of cup football. They have the psychological challenge of performing at the Parc de France with all the atmosphere and pressure that creates. But they have a striker in the form of his life who has already scored against this opponent. They have the confidence of that Club World Cup result. And they face a Paris Saint-Germain side that is nowhere near its best. The first leg on Wednesday is not likely to be a comfortable night for either team, but the evidence suggests that Chelsea, even arriving with their own challenges, are facing a Paris Saint-Germain that is deeply fragile. 10 goals conceded, a depleted midfield, defensive uncertainty, and a return that has not yet arrived. The task for Liam Rosignol is clear. Stay disciplined, stay organised, limit the damage if Paris Saint-Germain find moments of quality. And if the chance arrives, because it will arrive, make sure Jão Pedro and the forwards are ready to take it. The second leg at Stamford Bridge, if Chelsea can survive Paris with the tie still open, becomes a different conversation entirely. But we start on Wednesday, and Wednesday starts now. This is Maya on Chelsea. If this kind of analysis is what you want for every big Chelsea night in Europe, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and stay with us. The Champions League is here, and so are we.